Hello and welcome back to the RP-1 career playthrough. So, throughout the time that I've been playing RP-1, I've had to restart twice now. The first time because I ran into some problems and wasn't able to kind of continue forward. I kind of locked myself out of certain contracts and whatnot. And then the second time we restarted was because there had been a very large update to RP-1. If you notice by the length of this episode, or potentially feature-length film, we are going to be restarting RP-1 once again. However, we're going to be doing so in a more efficient manner this time. It came to my attention as I was starting to go orbital in the previous episode that it was already about to be 1962 and we hadn't reached orbit yet. So I feel that it was time to kind of do one more redux, but this time we're going to be doing things a little bit more correctly. So I decided, rather than putting out another 4 episodes doing the exact same things as we did the previous 2 times, I'm just going to put out one large episode, and we're going to go through both of the first contracts together from start to finish, and we're going to complete them on time, and by December 1956 we will be positioned to start in orbit. And then I'm going to pick up the series basically from that point on, and we're going to start going orbital and start doing those contracts as well. But I kind of wanted to refresh the series, and because I ended up making different decisions in the second playthrough, or this third playthrough. I ended up focusing on different technologies and different contracts. So I did things differently this time. And so rather than just come back with the next episode, be like, oh yeah, I restarted, so now it's, 1956, as opposed to 1962, which is where we were at. So all the stuff that I'm doing right now that you're seeing is all the basic things. I did this in the beginning of the last episode. Here is the one difference, is that we are going to prioritize our SRB science. In this run, we are going to be utilizing SRBs a lot more effectively, and therefore we are going to prioritize the solid rocket booster technology over the rest of it. Now, I have the ability to hire a bunch of staff right now, and I'm going to actually turn them all into scientists. I'm not going to hire any engineers until I have a launch pad available for them to work on. So let's go ahead and check out the VAB, and we are going to get our first rocket started. So what I'd like to do here as well, another reason why this is longer, is I slowed down my in the VAB rocket building process so we can kind of go and talk about what we're doing a little bit better. I can kind of slow things down and kind of discuss my thought process through all these. And this rocket that we're building right now is the standard issued Aero-B rocket. This is pulled straight from the Wikipedia that teaches you how to start RP-1 and go through your beginning programs. Later I'm going to start deviating from that design, and we're going to start building our own things. But for now, this is just kind of a copy and paste. So first thing you want to do is, besides put everything together, is get your lower stage, the SRB Tiny Tim, and its decoupler put into place, and then just moved off to the side for now because that's basically done. We're not going to need to work with that again. So I like using the rounded cone as opposed to just the regular pointy cone, but you can use either of those cones. I would recommend using a cone shape so you can achieve best aerodynamics. So here we're going to turn down the antenna rating. We don't need as much as it starts us off with, because this is just a sounding rocket. We're actually going straight up as opposed to downhill, so we probably don't need as much as we left ourselves. And then, as per usual, we put in the standard 3 science experiments that we have. Well, we put in the 2 experiments, the thermometer and the barometer, and then we turn on the telemetry report that it already comes with. So now, for this Aero-B engine, we're going to need high pressure tank, and you saw that in the the red letters that I just highlighted. So we're going to go through here to our materials, and we only have the two unlocked, the steel and the high pressured steel. So we're going to go ahead and turn this into a high pressure steel. We're going to fill it with the appropriate fuel, and now we're going to resize it to be a more manageable rocket. So I'm doing 300 millimeters here. That's how the tutorial kind of starts you off, and that's what they suggest, and that's the size of your engine, so it's a good size to be. However, I would also recommend, I'm not going to do it in this series, but this is just something else you can do, is making a 400 millimeter width. You're going to have a smaller rocket, you're going to have to do some more magic with your aerodynamics, but it will make for an easier time when you go for the basic biological experiment, because your rocket will already be the right width, as opposed to having to taper it yourself. So there, we just went ahead and painted our rocket. I'm gonna have some better rocket designs in this playthrough, basically because I know how to work the paint tool a little bit better. So here we are, we're putting on wings. I had some default wings set beforehand from a previous test playthrough, so I just went ahead and got rid of those, because you won't have those. Your wings are going to look like this. So first thing we do is we adjust the thickness of the wings, because that is done best in that little sidebar. But for the rest of it, we're going to use these little control points to size our wings. And you can get these control points by hovering your mouse over one of the procedural wings and pressing J. So now we're going to spend quite a bit of time on these wings right now. As basic aerodynamics go, it's the general concepts are the same as with stock KSP, even though RP-1 uses Ferrum Aero Research, which is a much more realistic view of aerodynamics. But overall, the general aspect is you want your center of lift to be behind your center of mass, or in this case, lower than your center of mass. And so we're going to try to tune these wings to achieve that, but to achieve that in the most efficient way possible, so that way we're not spending so much money producing massive wings that we don't necessarily need. So we're going to try to min-max our thrust, center of thrust, center of lift, center of mass balls. So as you see here, I'm just kind of making tiny little adjustments, and they're making big changes along these lines. So there we go. That looks pretty good to me. I'm going to go ahead and save those as default, just in case anything happens. I can just put them back on. And we're going to go through here and paint the majority of the wings can be orange or yellow, whichever one that is, and the rest of it will be white. I am colorblind, and so I have difficulty with whether or not that's orange or yellow. So if you want to leave me a comment below and tell me which one that is, that'd be appreciated. But there we go. We got our wings on our tiny Tim. Everything's balanced out, so this should fly relatively straight. Now we're going to go ahead and put some text on the rocket to just name it. Not necessary. Your rocket will fly perfectly fine without it. Doesn't really add any weight or anything like that, but we're going to balance them on both sides. We're going to go ahead and name this the RP-1. So after we set up our staging, we are ready to go with this. And like I mentioned before, this is basically a copy and paste of what you'll find in the wiki, except all the different colors. So now we need to build a launch complex for this, so I'm just going to build one. I'm going to title it SR1, just for sounding rocket. It'll let me know that it's only rated up to 1 ton, and it's only going to be used for sounding rockets. So go ahead and time warp until that launch complex is completed, and then I come back here to the VAB in our rocket, and I'm just going to go ahead and hire my engineers now that we have something for them to work on. And we max ourselves out, have the max amount of engineers working on this rocket as they can. We're going to go ahead and tool that, so that's going to make for a much cheaper rocket. Currently it's $500 rocket to launch, but once we tool it, it's only $165. So we'll be able to pump out quite a few of these, and we'll be able to have redundancies if we need to. And lastly, at the start of your first rocket, it's going to tell you that it can't be launched until you unlock those parts. And so, but thankfully, it doesn't really cost anything to unlock those parts. So we have 2 RP-1s in the queue. Like I said, redundancy is going to be important. So if anything happens to that first launch, if it fails, or if it just explodes immediately, we'll be able to have one in the queue already set to go. So we're just going to warp to its completion, and then we're going to launch it in the daytime, of course, though. So let's go ahead and roll it out to the launch pad and see what time of the day it ends at. And thankfully, it is nice and bright out. It's afternoon. And so our first launch, the 13th of July, 1951, the RP-1, sitting on top of a tiny Tim. I launch with both the engines firing at the same time because the RP takes a second to spool up, and so we need it to be spooling up during the time that the tiny Tim is firing. This is just a general first launch. There's nothing too particular about it. If you've seen any RP-1 series before, either mine or someone else's, this first launch is going to look very familiar. Like with many first launches, it does not meet the Kármán line. It does not make it 100 kilometers up. But that's okay, because we are getting milestones, and certain milestones can be missed if you achieve too great of a launch the first time. Like you just won't get those secondary contracts. And the other thing is we're getting science throughout this, science and data on the engines and all that. So reverting the flight is, sometimes it could be ideal, but even if you have a bad launch and everything, you're still gaining data on stuff. If you make it above 40 kilometers, you're still gaining science. So we're not going to limit ourselves to a no revert career mode, because that might just be silly. But we are going to kind of own some of our failures, so that way we can learn from it. So we have some science to spend, 3.4, and we have a couple things we can unlock that are relatively cheap. But we're gonna spend our money unlocking post-war material science, because that will give us a lighter fuel tank that we can use. And a lighter fuel tank means that it's going to be a lighter rocket, which means that the fuel is going to be more efficient, and it's going to push it even farther. So this RP is going to be going through a lot of different changes as things go on. Particularly notable is that we are now replacing the Tiny Tim solid rocket booster with the Aerojet, and this is one of the things that we unlocked with our very first tech node, which being the SRB. It has a slightly different thrust profile, so we need to adjust the wings ever so slightly, but we would go ahead and bring that center lift back down. And because and we're going to go ahead, because it's a new type of rocket, we're going to name it the RP-2. We're going to save that. That way it just differentiates between the RP-1 with its Tiny Tim and the RP-2 with its Aerojet. And now we're going to stage it a little bit different, because the RP burns for much longer than the Tiny Tim does. So we went ahead and made edits to the rocket that was in the queue already, and we don't have to change our launch complex, because all we changed out on our rocket was the SRB, and there's nothing that needs to be changed on the launch complex when you switch out an SRB. So that's one of the reasons why we wanted to kind of focus on those as well, because we can make big changes to our rocket right now without having to adjust our launch complex. And that means that we might be able to succeed in breaking the Kármán line with our second launch. So we're going to go ahead and warp to the morning. And on the spookiest day of October 31st, 1951, we get ready to launch the RP-2. And now the RP-2 needs to be flown a little bit differently. We don't hot stage the Aerojet or the Aerobee until much later into the Aerojet's flight because it has a much longer burn time. And when we drop the solids early, we have to actually spend more time and not drop them so early that they come flying past our rocket and explode. So little things that you learn in the test flight in the simulator program and that you hope you can get right during the real launches. And I was lucky that that SRB angled slightly away from our Aerobee because it very well could have just hit the back of our engine and blown up. So we just completed an uncrewed speed record and altitude record, and we actually broke the 100 kilometer Kármán line, the first Kármán line that it determines that the contract sets you out to break. We're still we're only 115 apoapsis, so we're still not in space yet, but we definitely completed this contract and a few of the secondary unofficial milestones. Let's go ahead and range safety this so it doesn't blow up our people back at the KSC. And checking out all the contracts we completed. It's pretty good. We're making our way there. So yeah, and with that, we got our very first headline. And if you're not familiar with the new update of RP-1, the Space Gazette will notify the public as well as you when certain milestones have been completed, like first object in space and first orbit and all that. We have a bit of science to spend, and we're going to spend it on early tracking because that will unlock the biological experiment for us, and that will allow us to do another contract. And then we spend the rest of the points back in solid rocket booster technology. So now we are going to look at the contract and take for the suborbital suborbital trajectory and return. So that means that we need to not only reach space, but we have to bring some part of our rocket safely back. Now I like to take this contract next because we only have to make one change to our rocket for the most part, and that's to add a parachute and a decoupler on it. And those are both relatively cheap, and the parachute costs quite a bit in time. There's for some reason adding parachutes onto your rocket just puts so much extra time onto its build process. So we're going to go ahead and rate our parachute here in the action group stage because you can't do it from the regular VAB. And we're going to lower its deployment altitude. There's no need for it to deploy as high as it does. It's just a waste of time coming down. So there we go. It now has a detachable nose cone with a set of parachutes to bring it back. I'm not going to name it anything different. It's still basically the RP-2. Maybe the RP 2.5, if you will, because it has a slightly different upper stage, but the lifting vehicle is still the same. So and it's always best to only update what you need to update on a rocket to complete its contract because it's cheaper to make minor adjustments. And so if you know that you're going to try to use one rocket for multiple contracts, to try to build a nice in-between so you don't have to rebuild your launch complex every single time. Alright, and our next Aerobee is ready to launch. We just need to roll it out to the complex. And on the 21st of December 1951, we are ready to launch the RB-3. So we put it out on the launch pad, but then we immediately returned to the main screen because we realized that we can now unlock a leader in our admin table. So I'm just going to kind of go through here and show what each of the leaders' special abilities are, and then we're going to go ahead and choose what is best for us. And normally I would go with him, Satish Duan. I apologize if I mispronounced that, because of his increased science gain. However, right now, funding is very important. That was one of the problems that we had in the previous series. So we're actually going to take Valentin Golushko because of his bonus to the research salaries and a little bit of the bonus to our reputation. So there we go. We now have a leader. And because we get that little bonus to our researcher salaries, let's just go ahead and hire a bunch more. I mean, let's get our science just really cranking through here. As you see there, I actually increased, or I shortened the time that it's going to take to research that next node. But all right, here we are. We are third launch. And then we're just going to get our screens all set and throttle up and get ready to go. When we fire, the Aerojet fires with no problem. It's looking absolutely great. And then I get about ready to hot stage, but I do it a little too late. And this RB engine did not have the ullage necessary to ignite. So this is going to be a failed launch. Sadly, but it's due to the bad hot staging, but it's okay because of we are building data on that Aerojet SRB, so it will be more reliable in the future. And we're also going to take a moment. We're going to test out our parachute. This is the first time using it. There's no flight data on it. There's nothing to improve from this, but it's cool to see for ourselves, to see if it was rated correctly, if it will stop in time. Sadly, we weren't able to save any of the rest of the rocket because of the high forces. When it flipped around, it basically ripped itself off the nose cone. But the nose cone managed to land safely, and that is very encouraging for its future use when it actually does run correctly. So let's go ahead and recover this vessel, go back to the VAB. So we are going to own that failure. We're going to eat the cost of that rocket, but we're going to learn from it. And let's go ahead and recondition the launch pad, and then we're going to get ready for our redundancy rocket. And that's the second rocket that's in the queue. So we're going to time warp till it's ready. And on the 8th of February, 1952, we are going to try again for the RB-2. Throttle up, systems go, and ignition. The Aerojet has been proven pretty consistent. However, once again, my own bad timing with the hot staging led to more ullage problems, and so this too will not be doing anything of significance except once again testing out the parachutes. Once again, the rocket rips itself from there. I mean, no surprise there. It's not really built for that kind of maneuvering. But we safely managed to recover the nose cone, and that's funding. That's good funding to get back. So once again, it is sad. We do waste some time having those two rockets that went nowhere. But, you know, sometimes it's the price you pay for space flight. So now we've spent some time, and that means we've unlocked some new science, and that means that we have the ability to upgrade our ARB engine to the XASR1, and that is the next iteration of that engine. And it's interesting because it burns for less time. However, it requires more fuel to be in the tank. And so more fuel for less burn time somehow equals more delta V. Don't ask me, I'm not a rocket scientist. I'm only a brain surgeon. So now that we have a different engine and a different length on our tanks, we're going to have to make a few minor adjustments to our wings. Thankfully, they're not big enough adjustments. We don't have to retool them. So now we're going to adjust our staging. Once again, the RP, I mean, you could hot stage it at the same exact time, the same way you do a tiny Tim, but that's a bit of a wasted time during that burn, because your RP is not really going to be doing anything as far as contributing to the thrust. It's just going to be burning, but that would be one way to guarantee that you don't have any ullage issues. Alright, so now we're going to add a couple to the launch pad, but it needs to be reconditioned because we now have a different fuel type in there. And so the launch complex that we had before wasn't rated for the fuel type for the XASR. It was only rated for the RP, so a new launch complex is necessary. And see, this is nice because this is the first time that we've had to adjust our launch complex since the start of it, since we created it, and that's just because we've only been switching out the SRBs up until now. The more that I use SRBs, the more that I really enjoy them. Also, during that time, we were able to unlock post-war material science, which means that we now have access to a new fuselage, a new tank type. So we went ahead and chose that new one, and then that means we had to adjust the size of the rocket, therefore leading to having to tool it one more time, which was bad. We were getting ready to launch the RP-3, so we tooled it in preparation for that, but then we didn't realize that we would have been resizing the tank again anyways, and so we had to retool for that as well. So we did waste a little money in tooling it that time, and so it was kind of bad order of operations for that. This didn't get named correctly. It should actually be the RP-4 since it has a new tank type, but we didn't pay attention to that. So on the 27th of April, 1952, we get ready to launch the RP-3 one more time in an attempt to get a suborbital trajectory and return. So let's throttle up, get our screens all set the way that we like them, and take a moment to kind of look at the ROB information. I was unhappy that it kept failing, so I wanted to see if there was anything I could notice. And then once again we wait. We hot staged a little earlier than we had previously, and that gave us the ability to go. We also had a new engine, and that might have had something to do with it because the new engine didn't have to hot stage for as long. And then we also had a lighter material fuselage to this, which means that it is going to go much higher. It has more delta V than its predecessors. So all of that put together means that we managed to get 196 kilometer apoapsis. So 198 there, but it's going to come down a little bit. So once we hit the 40 kilometer mark, our science goes. So we're just going to go ahead and fast forward until we hit the line of space. And then at that point, we're going to separate the nose cone and let the rest of the body kind of drift down. So let's go ahead and time warp up, let it do its science, do all the telemetry, and then come nice and slowly down. So now our contract is all but complete. All we need to do is make sure that this lands safely. And there we go. This parachute's more than capable of slowing this thing down to a safe speed. Which is good, because then that means that hopefully things that are slightly heavier, it shouldn't have a problem with as well. So the name of the game in RP-1 is always the ability to expand on what you have so far. So now that we've got more science, and a whole mess of science, we're going to actually unlock two very important things. And that is the early science, and that's going to give us the biological experiment, and early material science, which is going to once again give us a new tank material to work with, which is going to be lighter and more efficient. So now I want to unlock, or I want to grab this new contract for the biological experiment. I want that to be the next thing that we work on, but I need to check real fast and make sure that we have access to that experiment, or if that's something that we're waiting on. So I go down here and I check out early science, but that's the advanced biological. We don't need the advanced, we just need the basic one. So that's here, and we already are spending time to unlock that, and that's actually going to be the next thing that we unlock. And at 78% completed, that's going to be unlocked fairly quickly, so I feel confident in taking this contract. So we're going to take the first low space biological experiment, the suborbital research. I'm going to try to flip back and forth between the two programs, so that way I'm not favoring one over the other, so they can both be completed around the same time to maximize our efficiency. So we're going to go ahead and take the RP-3, since that is our most advanced standing rocket. And all we need to do here is tack on the biological experiment. But of course I'm going to go and look through, see if there's anything that I can upgrade, see if that is the best. And I noticed that I can actually upgrade the fuel tank once more, can adjust its utilization, and adjust the tank size to match the burn time, the desired burn time that we want. And then, so I noticed we are at the point where we've unlocked enough technology of the tanks that we could actually see if the conventional structure tank is better than the modular one. So let's go ahead and do a quick comparison of the two, and then we'll keep going on building this. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove this tank, and we're just going to get two brand new versions of these tanks. So we're going to look at the difference between the conventional structure and the modular structure. Now first off, the conventional structure comes in at 1 meter length, whereas the modular comes in at 750. So we're going to just even those out. So we're looking at the same exact size tank. We're going to put these side by side and we're going to compare. And what we find is that pretty much across the board that the conventional tanks can hold more fuel, more liquid mass, wet mass, than the modular tank can. Therefore, it is going to be heavier than the modular tank. So the modular tank is lighter, but it can hold less fuel, which means that in order to achieve the same amount, you might have to make the modular tank longer, in which case you're dealing with a whole different thing. But across the board, steel fuselages, aluminum fuselages, stringer tanks, it's pretty much the fact that at the same size and the same materials as the modular tanks, the conventional tanks can hold more liquid fuel. So we're going to go with that. So So we're going to go ahead and rebuild our top stage rocket. We got to make sure that it has enough liquid fuel and oxidizer to have the engine ignite for as long as it is rated for. So now, because we're using this conventional tank, we don't have to build it as long as we had previously with the modular tank, and so therefore we saved a little bit of weight on that. So hopefully this should be able to perform a little bit better than using the same tank in the modular aspect. So we renamed this to the RB4. It should actually be the RB5 because we've changed the tank structure, the tank type, but we're just going to leave it as the RB4. And so now we're just going to recolor it so we have our same kind of orange and white color scheme. And we're just making some minor visual adjustments to it. Nothing that has any bearing on anything. But then we remember that we're going to make this into a biological experiment sounding rocket, so we decide to add the letters BE to it to kind of differentiate it from just a general sounding rocket. And so then we save the rocket of the same name. But now this is going to be used for the biological experiment contract, which means that we're going to not only need to have the experiment stored on here, but we're also going to need to have a little bit of sounding payload to complete the contract's requirement. So now I go ahead and take a look at both the modular and the conventional structure for the sounding payload, and I find that the conventional structure, while as the same as with the liquid fuel, can hold more for less mass. However, it is not modular like the modular tank, so I can't adjust it into a cone shape the way that I did with the modular tank, because the biological experiment is a little bit wider than 300. It's about 350, 375 millimeters across, and so in order to have a nice transition between the biological experiment and the fuselage of the rocket, because the fuselage of the rocket is 300 millimeters, so I'm going to use the modular sounding payload tank to make that transition. And now I'm going here and I'm just micro adjusting the size so that way we can have enough sounding payload that we need, but nothing too much more than that, because anything more is just going to be a waste. We don't need it for the contract, and it's not going to do us any good, so there's no point in packing on extra sounding payload. And now I'm also going to adjust the size of the nose cone. This was a bad idea. I'm just going to state that out now, because even by making that small adjustment from being a 300 millimeter cone to a 375 millimeter cone is going to require us to tool it again. So that's just wasted money, because I only bring it to this size for this rocket, and it's purely cosmetics. It was just to have everything kind of fit the size of the experiment. And now here I have a little bit of a glitch. It's there's this gap in between the sounding payload and the biological experiment, so I just come in here and using the object placement I just tighten it up a little bit. Same goes with the decoupler. I don't know why there was that gap, so I just kind of go and push it up, and that's just purely for aesthetics. Wouldn't make a difference in its flight. I wouldn't really notice it unless I was in the VAB, so. Alright, so we're going ahead and changing the style of our decoupler, just giving it something to look a little different. We go for the silver and black kind of checkerboard pattern. For our sounding payload, we don't make it gold. We wanted to kind of differentiate it from everything else, so we kind of stick with the stock gray look. And we turn on our experiment, so that way it's running right from the get-go. And because we've now added more weight to the top of this rocket, our center of mass and center of lift are all out of whack. So we're gonna have to take some time and readjust these little winglets to make sure that our center of lift is below our center of mass. So we're just gonna come in here and we're making the wings slightly longer and then shortening it up so we can really min-max where our center of lift goes. So now that we've done that, we need to change the wings on the bottom as well because they still don't match like the ones on top didn't. So we're just going to copy the ones on top and bring them down here, and that's more than enough. I don't feel the need to really min-max the wings on the bottom on the Aerojet because they are going to be only useful for a short amount of time. We get our staging all correct, and we still fit the editor checks here, so we should be all set to launch this. And we make sure that we have all of our experiments lined up, every kind of bit of science that we can get out of it, we should, and our experiments are great. So now, as you see here, we have tooling because we have a new body. The conventional tank we haven't tooled at all. It's also a new material, which we haven't tooled at all. And there's been a slight avionics change, and that was that size difference on the avionics. So that was a fairly expensive tooling for such minor changes. Another reason why I think that this should have been named the RB-5, but... So now that we have the rocket ready made, we're going to take off that biological experiment, and what that is going to do is that's going to allow us to build the majority of this rocket while the science experiment is still being researched. This way we can have some forward momentum while we wait for the early tracking node to be unlocked. And then once we complete that science, we can go ahead and edit the rocket that has already started its progress. It's already been built some of the way, so we really utilize that time well. So we're going to go ahead and scrap the RB-3 that we had in our queue, and that had actually prevented any of the RB-4 from being made. So that was something that we should have paid attention to earlier on before we started time warping, but we didn't. So that little head start that we thought we were giving ourselves on this rocket, we did not get. So we go ahead and save our changes, and we unlock the part for the biological experiment, and now this ROB rocket will be on its way. So now we're going to come back here into the administration building, and we see that we now have more so-called leaders, although these are companies, but leaders in their industry, I guess, that we can now choose from and get little buffs and debuffs from based on which ones we choose. We're just going to kind of go through here and look at all of them, but the ones we end up going for are JPL, and that is for its science gain. That's going to be very useful. The next one we choose is going to be the Aerojet company, and that is because they give a boost to SRB technology, and like I mentioned before, researching SRBs and utilizing the solid rocket boosters are what set this playthrough apart from the previous one. And then lastly, we're going to choose Rocketdyne, and that is because they give a buff into researcher salaries. So being able to aggressively spend on engineers and, well, not engineers, excuse me, on your science researchers, being able to hire more of them for cheaper is going to do us really well, and kind of utilize time, which is a very valuable resource in RP-1. There we go. And so now with our new contract leaders, we can now research slightly faster. So our next node is going to be coming months sooner than it was beforehand. So we're just going to go ahead and time warp until the next rocket is ready. But we're going to go ahead and duplicate that so we have one in redundancy ready to go in case something goes wrong with this. But we also are very close to unlocking the next solid rocket engine technology node. So we're going to go ahead and just warp to that point. So now that we have a better technology, let's edit one of these rockets to utilize it. So now what we have is we unlocked solid rocket booster technology. So now we can change this Aerojet out for a Nike. The Nike will, I believe, burn the same amount, but at a much greater velocity. There's a few differences between the solid rocket boosters to look at, but for the most part, time, ignition time, as well as the kilonewtons of thrust are what sets what you should be looking at when choosing your SRB. So now we gotta find a nice little launch clamp for this, because the small launch clamp seemed a little too small and the medium seemed a little too big. And so I want to find something that kind of fits the rocket. So we're going to check out some of these radial attachment points. And for the most part, they look fine. Turn the center of lift and the center of mass back on as I put these winglets back on. And I see that I'm going to have to make a slight adjustment to them as well. I could save myself from having to adjust my wings as often by not min-maxing the center of lift so close to the center of mass. I feel that if there's a little bit of wiggle room there when we eventually upgrade ourselves like we're doing now, the wing will still be stable through the different design iterations. Therefore, we didn't have to tool them separately, and we didn't have to build them separately. So that is something that I kind of learned throughout this playthrough. And I feel that you learn quite a bit each time you go along. And I'm thankful that I got to learn these lessons early enough in the playthrough that we're still in the early stages of the game. We're still in 1952, so I feel like we're doing much better. Now, I couldn't actually launch that. I couldn't save those changes because the launch pad that we had that previous rocket on was not designed to handle a change in rocket like this. Primarily, it was the height difference, the Nike being a much taller SRB than the Aerojet. So we had to just discard those changes. We saved the rocket, so all those changes to the RB-4 will be there, but we're not going to be able to modify what we have until then. So here is the basic biological experiment. This is our 6th launch on the 8th of August, 1952, on the Aerojet SRB. And we have a clean hot stage ignition and a clean dropping of our solids slightly early. The reason why you would want to drop your solids early, and this is an option that is in the MechJeb auto ascent, and that's how I kind of started to pay attention to it, was by the end of the SRB's ignition life, its fuel life or whatever, it produces less thrust and starts to it starts to drag the rocket down. So by letting go of it early, it will separate itself and it won't pull the rocket downwards as it's going upwards. It's a little hard to describe, but it's been very useful in this more SRB heavy playthrough. All right, so now we are past the 40-kilometer mark, and so we are gathering some science experiments with the new biological. We have like a little rat in space right now. We did reach. We didn't reach space. We didn't reach 140 kilometers. So sadly, we're only getting high atmosphere science. But it is, new science, and that is always worth a launch. So we're just going to go ahead and time warp this back down into the atmosphere. And something that I liked about this design, I don't know what it was, but it seemed to be perfectly balanced right around the top of the biological experiment, right where the parachute was. And when it came down, instead of rocketing down from the nose cone or from the still pointy end of the sounding payload, but instead it just floated down sideways. So that was very interesting. But once the parachutes deploy and once they are fully opened, and it brings us down at a very cool 4 meters per second landing, I feel very, very comfortable that the creature that we just launched on the top of a rocket is very comfortable as it splashes down in the Atlantic Ocean. But with that, our contract for the biological experiment has been completed. So we're going to go ahead and take that science that we unlocked during that, and we're just going to jump right on in and get basic rocketry. And that is going to give us the option of upgrading our Aerobee engine, the liquid fuel engine that we have. Not the Aerojet, that's our solid rocket booster, but the Aerobee. We're going to be able to upgrade that, and that will be a huge step in our sounding rockets. We're probably going to need to build a new launch complex for it because it's going to use a different fuel mixture than its previous version. Alright, so we're going to come in here and adjust the Aerobee 4 biological experiment. We're going to launch it again, but this is solely for the science. So since this is not for a contract, we can go ahead and get rid of this sounding payload because we don't need it. All it's going to do is weigh us down and prevent us from going as high as we'd like to. We're going to go ahead and turn the decoupler into a cone, so that way we can kind of taper down to the right size. Keep everything nice and smooth. And it was about this time that I realized that I had already made changes to this rocket, to the Aerobee 4. We have actually already designed the Aerobee 5 to use the Nike engine. So I decided to just open that up and utilize that design instead. So we just come back here, make ourselves a cone decoupler. And we are back in business. So now we have a biological experiment atop the new rocket, so we'll not only be able to test the Nike's performance, but we'll be able to get some science in it as well. Now, we're not doing any contract for this, so we have to try to make this as cost effective as possible. But by doing it, we shall gain even more science, which will allow us to unlock more parts, which can make for the contracts that we do end up taking more successful. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and save this. But the problem is it's now too heavy to be launched from our typical sounding rocket launch pad. So we're going to actually have to create a new one or renovate the one that we have. So the renovation has begun. So we're just going to pop out here real fast and time warp to get that taken care of. So there we go. We upgraded our sounding rocket launch pad for the first time and is now capable of handling up to 2 tons. And look at that. We don't have anything to tool. Everything on this rocket has is using sizes that have already been tooled, and so it's as cheap as it can be. So let's go ahead and get our engineers situated. And that increases or decreases the time necessary to build this rocket. So we're going to go ahead and put a couple in the build queue. We're going to wait for those to build. So now we roll out our RP-1 BE, and the BE stands for biological experiment. And we get it ready for the launch pad, and then we get ready to launch. We've got our screens, and you see we don't have any contracts to fulfill. However, we do have some milestones which we could attempt, so we're going to leave those up. Throttle up, make sure our experiment is running, and we got to pay attention to the appropriate time to launch our engine. I want to point out that the Nike was not my favorite SRB. That every time you see a successful launch from here on out of the Nike, just know that there was about 5 unsuccessful test flights in our simulation. And the reason why I hot staged the RP engine so early was I couldn't activate that stage any later than I did. For some reason we would have ullage problems, and the Nike just likes to drag that rocket back down with it. So now our apoapsis was only 249 out of the 250 required for our milestone. So we didn't get any milestones and we didn't complete any contracts, but we actually got a good chunk of science and the data of running these engines and just getting more reliable as with every launch that we get. That was worthwhile, and so therefore I can consider this a success. We're going to use the Nike rocket a few more times, but it is not a good... I did not have a good time with the Nike SRB, which was sad because I was very excited to unlock the next level of SRBs from the Aerojet, but in my testing and everything, I feel like sticking with the Aerojet as long as possible would be a better call. Because Aerojet is just so efficient. It has such a good just static thrust fire. It has a good thrust to weight ratio. It doesn't slow down as quickly as the Nike did, therefore you don't run into the ullage problems that you did with that. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. That was a successful launch. That was on the 17th of October, 1952, by the way. I forgot to mention that. So now we're going to look at our contracts, and it's a bit of a tough choice. I'm not sure which one to go for next, because depending on what we choose will determine what we end up building. But what we end up choosing is the low space film return contract, and that's going to lead to a bigger rocket, which is going to lead to the rest of the contracts, such as the downrange contracts. We're going to need a bigger rocket for that. But by starting with the film canister contract, we'll develop that rocket for those contracts in this contract. So I feel like that was the best usage of our contract. Now I time warped forward ahead, but I should have gone here to the science building first and unlocked some more science for us to research. But we went ahead and got satellite era materials, as well as the 1956 through 1957 solid rocket engines, because I've been having so much fun with the SRBs, I just can't stop myself. But there we go. So we go ahead and started researching those as well. But hey, what time is it? It's new rocket time. So rather than opening something that we've already created, because all of those are small sounding rockets, we are now going to start from scratch and build ourselves a V2 like rocket. We're not following the wiki tutorial for the V2 rocket here. If this is your first time in RP-1, I highly recommend doing that, though, following the wiki tutorial for how to build the next version of your sounding rockets. But for now, we're just gonna kind of slap something together and see how it works. So we put a boat tail adapter on the top of our avionics, and that's going to house our payload. So since we have the ability of having a nice material for our conventional structures, we go ahead and choose that. We pick a boat tail adapter, we flip it upside down, and that's going to act as a shroud for our A4 engine. And there we go. So yeah, that's the rocket. That's all we need. So let's go ahead and launch this thing. Just kidding. We need to make this actually look like a rocket. So let's go ahead and bring the boat tail adapter down, because we're going to want it to fit the shape of our rocket. We're going to go ahead and increase our diameter on our fuel tank, because the A4 engine is quite wide, and we want it to kind of fit the profile. So we fill it with the fuel type it needs, we extend it out so that way our burn time is correct, and then we come back down here and adjust the bottom boat tail to match. Alright, so let's get the film camera on there, and as you see, the boat tail is a little too thin for it. We're going to need to do some adjusting in order to get the fairing the right shape. So now that we have that, we go to put the fairing on, but we realize we have too many nodes, so we drop that down to 2 nodes, because that's all we really need, and then we put it on. It looks great. So now we're going to take this boat tail adapter, and just like the top, we're going to bring it down to 2 fairings. We're going to put that on there. I like it. It looks good. It could use some minor adjustments, so I'm going to go ahead and pin this wheel here, or not wheel, pin this window here, so I can just make those minor adjustments and see how it looks in real time. And then lastly, we're going to take it off staging, because there's no need to stage that fairing. It's solely for aerodynamics, and it's mainly for looks. I don't know that it makes too much of a difference having it or not having it. Alright, so now we are going to work on wings, and we're going to take quite some time to figure this out. But first we're going to adjust our avionics to control the weight of the rocket, at least the current weight. So let's go ahead and get some more procedurally generated wings on here. Again, we're going to do 3. But here what we're going to do is we're going to kind of clip it into the rocket to make it fit better to the body of the rocket. So once again, always we start with the thickness of the wings first. You don't have to. I like to take care of that first, because then I know that everything else that I am doing to the rocket or to the wings already has the thickness of the wings taken into consideration. So we're going to work on these wings for quite some time, because I had a big old struggle trying to get the center of lift and the center of mass to line up. And what we ended up with are these huge wings that made no sense for the rocket, but according to those 2 little balls, we only just barely made it. And then we find out later, once we paint the rocket, that those wings have changed. So bear with me as I kind of struggle here to get the wings the right shape, because this isn't even what they ended up being. But it was just so strange to me that once I painted the rocket, the center of lift and the center of mass changed so drastically. I changed around the mass strength multiplier, and I actually for a little bit, I turned the wings into tanks that can hold fuel to kind of adjust the center of mass down a little bit further. But I didn't need the center of mass adjusted down, so I quickly got rid of that idea. Yeah, I wanted the wings to be shorter. I didn't like how wide of a profile they had become. But it seemed like no matter what I did, they kept getting wider and wider. So kind of giving up. That's the best I can do. It is below the center of mass, so that's all that really matters. So we're going to go ahead and name this the GW1-FC, and that is the gold wing, because that's going to be the name of this rocket series. The Gold Wing 1, and that is a film camera that is attached to, so that's where the FC comes from. So I don't know if you noticed, but the center of lift just changed below us once we added color to the fairing and color to the avionics. It is now way down there, because those wings were way over engineered. So absolutely thrilled. I'm going to paint these, and then I'm going to readjust them, because like I mentioned before, those wings were a little bit ridiculous. And we're just doing the color scheme of white and gold, because it's the gold wing. Yep. So yeah, so let's readjust this for a smaller profile, less wing necessary. Yeah, like look at that. That seems like a more reasonable wing for this type of rocket. Once again, I throw some fuel in there. Into the wings, that is. Which adds a little extra fuel to it so we can actually bring down the length of this rocket. Anything helps. Like I said before, sorry for spending so much time on the wing, but having the right size for these things will pay off in the end. Let's go ahead and slap some text on here. Name the rocket. And we name it the Goldwing 1. We go ahead and give it some NASA font. We went ahead and threw FC in there just to differentiate that it's a film camera that is carrying. Now, this engine is going to need launch clamps, but I wanted to do something a little bit different because, because we could, and we had unlocked these modular launch pads. So we're going to start with this launch pad, which technically is all I need. I guess it is a launch clamp in and of itself. But just because I want the look of a launch clamp, we're going to come in here and we're going to find out what works. I kind of like this little three-way symmetry to these, and they're not too big, so not too obtrusive. So this is going to be how our rocket launches with this little launch pad here. But because it is a new rocket and much heavier, much heavier than anything that we've launched thus far, we are going to need to make a new launch complex for it. Let's go ahead and save that and build a new LC. This is going to be the Goldwing 1 launch complex. And we're not going to change anything here because it's probably going to go through some changes later. And for now, all we need it to launch is this film canister and maybe a handful of other experiments. So we go ahead and warp time for that launch complex to be completed. And we come in here and we realize that we can make the launch complex complete much faster by increasing its efficiency. So we go ahead and turn up the efficiency on that to make rockets come out faster. Take note of this because I'm going to forget. I'm going to forget that for a very long time, and the Goldwing launch complex is going to be pumping out at almost 200% efficiency from now on. So it's good because we're building rockets much faster and at a better cost. But what's the cost that we are paying for that? All right, so we're going to go ahead and come back here into the VAB, but we're going to open up the RP-5 eventually after we stop looking at our rocket. Any day now. There we go. Opening up the RP-5. And that is because we have unlocked a new science experiment, and we're going to want to adjust our avionics to match. So we went ahead and got rid of the biological experiment, which means that we no longer have to be at a 3.75 millimeter, and we can bring ourselves back down to the 300. We were able to upgrade our avionics to be a more lightweight version of it, so that's going to be good. We bring in our parachutes back to a regular size and putting it all together, making sure it all works. So let's go ahead and get rid of the BE on here because we're no longer housing a biological experiment, biological creature. This is just the plain old RP-5. We're still using the Nike engines. We haven't unlocked anything better. We could have actually just put the Aerojet back on and probably had a much better success rate. But we stick with the technology we unlocked. And I wasn't too keen on the launch clamps that we had here, so I went and found this little launch tower, this little sounding rocket tower, and we went and attached it to that instead. And I'm trying to adjust its positioning. And this launch stick can be a little funky sometimes. So there we go. We have the new and improved RP-5. Slight improvements to the avionics and the experiment. So nothing really to the body of the rocket or the launch vehicle itself. So we're not going to designate it with a new number. So we extend out the length of the rocket a little bit because it didn't pass the editor checks. And we go ahead and tool it, but we tooled that a little early, and that's going to kind of come back to bite us. Not particularly hard, but just the fact that tooling is one of those places where it's best to be efficient about it because you're spending money that you might not necessarily need to. So here we are on the 1st of December 1952, ready to have our 8th launch, the RP-5, and this is solely for science and data. We don't have any contract requiring it, but we have a biological capsule on here, as well as the updated science experiments that we've gotten. And it was a completely nominal launch, and our hot staging activated without a fault. No ullage problems. And when we dropped our solids early, it did not bump into our rocket, causing it to go off course. So all in all, that was as perfect a launch as it could be. And we're just going to time warp our way up to space, where we will separate. And time warp our way back down. The experiment didn't spend very much time in space, so we still have a lot to go before we can collect all the science we need from those areas. But with the parachutes deploying, we had very nominal touchdown as well. So all in all, that was a great launch. We didn't complete any milestones, but that's okay. We weren't trying to break any records at this point. So now we're going to go ahead and warp past the reconditioning of the launch pad. We have another set of rockets, another rocket coming up. The gold wing is still working, but before our launch of this rocket, we unlocked new technology. So we're going to go ahead and edit this rocket. How many times am I going to say rocket? We're going to edit the RP-1 to include the new experiment that we unlocked, which is the mass spectrometer. And that's going to be good. It's going to give us new science for both in atmosphere as well as in low Earth space. We haven't hit orbit yet. So you saw me, I thought about changing out the Nike, but I decided to just keep on it. We couldn't just simply change the lower booster without consequences. Here you see me trying to, and I'm going to go through an attempt, but none of this you have to pay attention to because I don't end up utilizing this rocket design. It doesn't pass the editor checks, so it's kind of worthless. But I did want to include it to show, my whole thought process through this whole 2.5 hours of RP-1. I wanted you to see the whole process and what it takes to kind of come to the designs that I came to. And to see where I could do better, to see where I did wrong, and to hopefully learn from that. I feel that you can learn as much from a tutorial as you can through a career, just a playthrough. I feel that sometimes you learn more effectively through seeing other people struggle through different designs and having to come back to the drawing board and change things. You learn why the person struggled. So that rocket did not pass any of the checks, and so therefore I just canceled the edits to that. I discarded the redundant rocket of the RP-5. We're going to launch the RP-5, but only with the added mass spectrometer experiment, not the change in SRB. So we're going to come in here and we're going to tool the gold wing now that we have a launch complex for it to go to, and we're going to go ahead and put a couple of those in the queue. So we're going to come in here now that we have a new complex, and we're going to hire all the engineers that we can to make sure that our rocket is built as quickly and effectively as possible. So now what I'm doing is I'm holding shift while I'm clicking, and that allows me to add 10 at a time. So that's how that is done. So now before rolling out this rocket, the RP-5, we're going to go ahead and edit it, and we're going to put in the new mass spectrometer experiment that we had not put into this yet. And change out the Nike for the Aerojet. I try to do this kind of 3-stage sounding rocket of just 2 Aerojets on top of each other. I adjust all the staging. And I'm like, oh, maybe this might work, so I'm trying to adjust the launch stick, and I keep running into problems. I create what looks like a weapon of mass destruction, and then I decided to just hit Control Z and grab it from a much better place this time. Check my center of lift, center of mass. And then when I go to save it, it failed the editor's checks because this launch complex was designed for a Nike SRB for its height and its mass, because these Aerojets don't weigh as much as they need to for the launch complex to accept it. And we have access to that SRB, but it's very small. I don't even bother using it because it feels too small for a rocket. So, having no other parts unlocked yet, because we can't unlock the baby sergeants yet, so we just cancel our saves and leave the rocket as it was. So now we time warped. So now our Goldwing film camera is now ready to launch as well. But we're gonna go ahead and edit that to add the mass spectrometer. The whole point of editing the Aero B5, which we ended up not even saving in the beginning, we're gonna go ahead and add that to this rocket, and might as well have it running at the same time as everything else. There we go. We got both or all the experiments set to run. We didn't make any real changes to the rocket itself. We're going to adjust its control, how much weight the avionics can control, to make sure that it can maintain control for the first 50 seconds of flight, which is part of the contract. So now we're going to roll out the GW1. And on the 14th of November in 1953, almost an entire year since our last launch, we're going to roll it out to the launch pad and get this film camera downrange, into space and downrange. So here we are, looking great. Gold shining in the morning sunlight. An excellent choice for this design. So here we got the contract. It's got a lot of different parameters, but most of them are already fulfilled because we designed the rocket with those parameters in mind. The big one is maintaining control, but our last changes to our avionics should make sure that that happens. So there we go. The engine has spooled up and is lifting us forward. We're going to be using Smart ASS to control the pitch of our rocket. So you saw that I clicked in there right now, so it is being controlled by that. Currently, it's rather than SAS keeping it upright, it's the Smart ASS. So we're using the A4 engine, and we're going to go ahead and speed up the footage a little bit because we're just slowly pitching over. Every 10 meters per second, we're pitching over to the right, which is a little fast. Typically 15 meters per second is a safer turn rate, but we turn until we get to about 45 degrees, and then we hold it, and then we turn until we go to another 42 degrees, and then we hold that. And then once our apoapsis hits space, 140 kilometers, which is what is necessary for the contract, we are going to pitch horizontally at 0 degrees and just push for the maximum distance that we can. So we are pitching forward, eastward. And we bring it to 0. And we just start pushing forward to gain downrange distance. And as you see at the bottom of the contracts, we already completed a milestone of going 2,000 meters per second with an uncrewed vessel.
I believe milestones give you reputation as well as I don't know if they give you funds in RP1. If someone knows that, I'd be very interested in hearing that. But I believe it's just reputation that you get from the milestones, and that's good. All right, so our engine has finished its burn. We are now just floating free. Once we get a little bit of distance, I go ahead and disconnect the payload from the rocket because we were not getting any of the the film camera experiment was not running until it was separated. So even though we could have used that rocket's weight and momentum to kind of push us forward a little more, it was worth it to have the experiment running throughout that whole time. And so now all we need to do is make sure that it returns safely back to Earth, because our apoapsis is at the right height, and that should give us the right downrange distance. And there we go. We just passed the downrange distance that we need, and we're still climbing. So we've probably doubled the downrange distance that we needed. So it may be an issue returning back through the atmosphere, all this heating effect. However, our fairing is good at dissipating that heat, and we barely saw any repercussions from it. So we're now just time warping down, and once it passes the cloud layer, I know that it will be safe to deploy the fairings, that we have no more heating that we need to account for and protect against. So we went ahead and discarded those, and then we time warped down until the parachutes opened and brought us down at a very safe speed. And our film camera is now intact, and we can successfully complete this contract once we can recover. I said once we can recover. I said once we can recover. You know what? I'll meet you at the KSC. So here we are with our contracts completed and a little bit of science under our belt. Let's go ahead and recover this debris. Let's spend our science where we can. So now, we don't have too much science to spend, so we're going to have to think very carefully. And what we end up going for is the avionics prototype, which lead to lighter avionics, which means better delta V, as well as more efficient electrics to it. So we won't need, and that's not really going to matter at the moment. The amount of electricity we carry, we don't actually even really pay attention to. We just kind of throw a number in there and call it a day. But eventually, once we start planning for longer missions and orbits and missions out of low Earth orbit, that will become more viable. So now right there, I moved the 1956, 1957 SRBs to the top of the research list, as top as I can make it anyways. And then I hire more researchers to bring our total up to 200, and that brings the SRB research from being completed in June to only taking up until March to complete. And so by hiring researchers, you can shorten the time it takes for that research to be done, which means that we will now have access to 1956, 1957 SRBs in mid-1953. So now I'm going to check the contracts, and I want to see what we need to start working on next. And there's going to be an advanced biological contract, which is our capstone, and we're going to need that to complete this program. So we're gonna go out of there, and we're gonna check what our Goldwing is capable of. So here are with the Goldwing 1 film camera rocket. But we don't need the film camera anymore. We can go ahead and discard that. We still want the parachute and the decoupler and the fairing, so we're going to leave that. But now we are going to add an advanced biological capsule, and we're going to add the basic one as well, because we still have some science that can be grabbed from that, and we might as well have as many experiments running as possible. It's more efficient that way. So we're going to go ahead and name this the GW1ABE, and that stands for Advanced Biological Experiment. And the great thing about this rocket is that it's already fully tooled. We don't have to do anything. All we did was change out the payload, and so now we can just put it back onto the launch pad as is. All we had to do was unlock the science part. So now, only a couple days after our last launch, we have the RP-1, which can be rolled out to the launch pad. So on the 17th of November, 1953, we get ready for our 10th launch since the start of our new program. Not for any contract, but solely for in the name of science and the name of data. So here we are, another Nike test, another hopeful Nike success. Like I mentioned before, for every successful Nike launch you see, there were many test flights where we had to figure out the exact timing for that hot stage to go through. I cannot wait to unlock these next set of SRBs, because the Nike era of SRB was not kind to me. However, it is hard to deny the effectiveness of the Nike, because this launch ended up netting us a 317 kilometer apoapsis, which means a whole lot of science that the mass spectrometer was going for. Sadly, no biological experiment on this one, but that's probably why it was able to go as high as it did. But that was a lot of new science for us, and we also completed the greater than 250 kilometer altitude milestone, which was also a nice little touch to this. So this was quite a worthwhile launch. If we check our contracts here, we see our milestone. So let's go ahead and recover this vessel. We're going to go into the science tab and unlock what we can unlock. So now we don't have very much science, so we're going to just go ahead and unlock this basic rocketry engine node for 4 science. It's going to take up basically all of what we have, but that will allow us to upgrade our aerobee. And quick time warp allows us to unlock early material science, which is going to give us a new tank type that we can use. And we go ahead and just time warp again, just spend all that time. We don't need to launch a rocket, but now we finally have access to the 1956-1957 solid rocket boosters, and we can change out the Nike for the more reliable Baby Sergeant 11 times cluster. And we had done some test flights of the RP-1 with a Baby Sergeant cluster before we had unlocked it. So this is the entire time that we've been looking at the Nike. We've just been waiting for the Baby Sergeant. So now this is an SRB that did very well, and then they strapped 3 of them together, and that did very well. So they said, hey, why not strap 11 of them together? Because that's just going to do 11 times as well. And they weren't wrong. So here we have the RP-5 with the baby sergeants, and that is going to make... we also have a new tank material available, because as you noticed, we had unlocked the early material science node, so now we have access to stringer tanks. Still can't upgrade our engine yet. That's the next science node that we have. But we can upgrade our tank to be an even more lightweight one, which means even more efficiency per launch. Let's go ahead and name this the RP-6. But we don't want to build this one just yet. So we did a quick test of it, and I feel that we can upgrade this even farther. Let's go ahead and name it the RP-6. We can upgrade this even farther by just waiting a little bit of time and unlocking the next node of science. So we went ahead and time warped until we unlocked the early rocketry, which gives us the ability of upgrading this from the XASR-1 to the AJ1027, a much more efficient RB engine that burns for a longer time period and utilizes less fuel, but does need a little bit of an extension. We need to extend our tank length in order to achieve the appropriate burn time for our engine. So we stretch this one out a little bit longer. So now this is the true RP-6, which, you know, our naming convention got all messed up. It should have been like the 8 or something, the RP-7 or the RP-8 by this point. But here we are with the RP-6, and that is going to be the final design of our sounding rocket for the time being. So we went ahead and did a successful test, and then what we did was, without the baby sergeant, we took the RP-6 and tacked it onto a Goldwing 1, and now we have a rocket capable of achieving our downrange goals. We upgrade our launch complex, and we hire a bunch of new engineers to fulfill how many our launch complex can hold, and that's going to shorten the time that it takes for the rocket to be built. There we are. We're hiring people, and then we're also going to prioritize our SRB research. We do need to fire a few of the engineers from the previous launch complexes, since we're not using the sounding rocket launch complex anymore. So now we have a bunch of science to unlock before our next rocket launch, and we're starting to slow down with our rocket launches. If you noticed, we did a bunch between the years 1951 and 1953, but we're starting to get into later years, 1954, and then soon we're going to hit 1955 before we launch our next rocket. So we're not hitting the most efficiency as possible. We're also not doing any planes, and so ideally the most efficient way to play RP-1 is to include plane science in there as well, but you don't have to. It is designed in such a way that you can, you know, complete all of your goals that you need to without ever picking up an X-plane. But so I go and I'm trying to warp to complete, but it keeps killing my warp, and that's because our program is drastically low on funds. we don't have any new contract leaders that we can take to kind of fix that. So all we can do is just kind of fire as many people as we can possibly keep while maintaining our program, while keeping it running, and just trying to be as efficient as possible. What ended up working for me was every time I would warp to complete, it would just kill the warp when we ran out of funding. So I learned that by, instead of warping to complete, just going up there in the top left as to the time warp function and just choosing one of the speeds and warping forward that way. And as you'll see, it's giving me random numbers of money in the top left because we keep making money and then spending all of it. And so that's why it's killing the time warp, is because we're essentially out of money at that point. But by choosing this way to warp manually, you can see the dollar going down in the top left, but the production never stops. And that's the important part. And there we go. The Goldwing 1 Aero B6 is now ready for launch. And on the 10th of April, 1955, we are ready to complete our downrange 3,000 kilometer contract.
So this is going to have the same ascent profile as the previous launch. We're going to be using the Smart ASS guidance control over here. And yeah. Should be a pretty normal launch, just like anything else. This is going to have some spin stabilization to it as we adjusted our wings to be rotated. But we'll be getting into that later. So first we're just going to launch, and then once we hit about 80 meters per second, we're going to start pitching over at about 1 degree every 10 meters per second ascension. So let's just speed up the footage a little bit. We're going to show the full ascent because this launch has been different than all the other launches that we've been doing. With a sounding rocket, it's pretty simple once each stage has fired to just fade to when the engine cuts out. But since we're doing things like turning and spin stabilizing, as you can see there, the rocket is starting to rotate. We're just going to show the entirety of the process. For those who may not know, spin stabilization is a way to keep your unguided rockets pointed in the direction that they need to go as they fire, even though that they are unguided. So by spinning it up like this, we can more guarantee that the nose cone is going to be pointed in the prograde direction. And we were able to achieve this spin stabilization by rotating the wings ever so slightly on the lower stage, and that just naturally causes the rocket to spin. So I'm not exactly sure why, but the spin decides to slow down around this part of the atmosphere every single time, around 35,000 kilometers, or 35,000 meters, excuse me. And so once we go to separate, I'm just going to do a manual spin stabilization. There you go, you can see me hitting Q. Wasn't the best separation. I kind of wish that we had been spinning much faster, and I also wish that we had pointed down a little bit farther, a little more horizontally. But after a short period of time, and before we even hit our apoapsis, our downrange 3,000 milestone was easily met, and we still have much more to go, so we know that we could probably handle the 45 kilometer downrange contract. So that's good. We didn't need to recover anything, so we can just let it explode on contact with the atmosphere and just go back to go get started on our next one. So now as we look here, we see that we have 2 optional contracts and what's known as a capstone. And the capstone is the final contract of the program that will officially complete it. And so that's kind of going to be what we're working on next. We'd like to finish this suborbital rocket development program. And so let's go ahead and bring back the GW1 Aero 6, and we're just going to edit it a little bit because we need to have a sounding payload of 50 units. We have to bring 50 units of sounding payload down 4,500 kilometers. So we're going to get rid of the parachute because we don't need it. We don't need to recover the sounding payload or anything, so that's just extra cost and time built on the rocket for no real reason. So now we're going to shape our tank to be the right width, 300 meters, and we're going to extend it so that way it can hold precisely 50 units of sounding payload with a little wiggle room just in case. I feel like having 50.00001 is more of a good idea than just straight up 50. So this rocket is looking pretty good, but as I'm working on it, I'm thinking that there's probably some way that we can improve it a little bit. And first off, we found out that we have upgraded avionics, which is going to make a huge difference for both the near space and the science core, or near Earth, excuse me, and the science core type avionics. We were able to upgrade both of those, which will save some weight, which is always good. We went to launch it, but we don't have enough funds, sadly. So we're not going to be able to put this rocket out, and we could tool it. We might have enough funds for that, but at that point we're just spending money on a rocket we can't even produce. So we're going to just go back out here to the KSC, and we're going to fire a few people to hopefully balance out our budget. And then we are going to take a look at this next science node, 1958 solid rocket boosters, and it's going to take until October, and it's only April right now, so we are going to waste the majority of this year just researching. But I feel that by having these solid rocket boosters on our downrange rocket is going to make things a whole lot easier. So we're going to go back and edit the GW1 Aero 6 to incorporate these new solid rocket boosters. And the boosters that it has unlocked are known as the Casters, and they are some heavy-duty thrust-to-weight ratio. They've got they burn for quite a long time. These are not our grandparents' solid rocket boosters. So let's go ahead and get a couple decouplers, radial decouplers. We're going to put it here. I'm not sure how big these boosters are, so I left them pretty low. And here we are. Here's our first set of casters. The caster ones were used in some early rocket development, primarily noted on the Thor Agena rockets, but they were used all the way up until 1971. So these are some workhorse SRBs right here, and so I'm very excited to test them out. We finally unlocked them, so these are going to be part of our Goldwing lifter series going forward. So now I'm putting on the wings, and these are the same wings that we had on the rocket before, because we had saved them as our default, our preset. They do need some adjustment to get the center of lift below the center of mass. We'll just adjust them here, bring them down so they're a little bit lower of a profile. We don't need it to be completely efficient. We don't need them, you know, touching each other for something like this because our weight is going to be shifted around. But it's always nice to have them as close as possible. So now we're going to figure out how to set up our launch clamps. Pretty sure the SRBs don't need launch clamps. However, in this beginning stage of our launch pad, it doesn't hurt to have everything kind of set down. And because I know that the launch pad itself is a launch clamp, so the A4 engine doesn't need this little tower that I put here, but I like the look of it. I like the idea that we're now working with bigger rockets, and the launch pad has more requirements such as fueling and stuff, so it's more of an aesthetic than anything, but I really enjoy it. So we're going to go ahead and save this, and we're going to run a test on this rocket. And this test goes absolutely according to plan. It was perfect. It was beautiful seeing these Caster solid rocket boosters ignite. It made me so glad that I decided to spend the science and follow these solid rocket boosters, because they made the lifting of the GW1 so much easier. In the previous series, the previous set of RP-1 that I had completed, the one that was last in this playlist, we did not use any solid rocket boosters, basically, because we didn't unlock anything. We used liquid fuel engines as side boosters, just engines that didn't burn as long as the center booster, and so we were sending so much weight up there, and it cost us so much money just to make each launch vehicle. And so seeing how simple these SRBs can make your launch, and how efficient the bigger ones, such as the Casters, can be as far as your starting thrust to weight ratio, or even just getting off the launch pad entirely. It was just beautiful to see. So that was a great test, and tooling was expensive, as well as the launch complex that we had to create for it. It's the largest launch complex that we have to date, but we're gonna get a lot of use out of this GW2 launch vehicle. So I think it was worth it. So now we're coming back out to the KSC. As you can see, we only have basic rocketry and then the two rockets left to launch. And once we finish basic rocketry, we're not going to have anything to research. We don't have enough science to unlock any more nodes, which is not great. You know, hitting the wall of no research is a tough spot, and we could run the risk of killing our agency and not being able to move forward. That's one thing about RP-1 is there are ways to lose. There are ways to get yourself into a situation where you can't produce anything and you can't move forward. And so we're a little nervous, but we're gonna keep our head above water and not make as many failures as we can. So here we are. Our first GW2 has been completed, and now we are ready to launch it on the launch pad. So on the 23rd of February 1956, we load up the GW2 Aero B6 for the downrange 4,500 meter contract. Excuse me, the 45,000 meter contract. And look at that. Hear the roar of those engines and just the immense power that this thing is putting out just from those tiny little solid rocket boosters. And as I mentioned before, much earlier in this video, the best part about solid rocket boosters is they come with their own fuel, which means that the launch complex doesn't need to be changed
depending on which SRBs you're using. As long as you're still using the same liquid fuel engines that you were beforehand, then you can just switch out SRBs as long as it doesn't go over the weight capacity or the width capacity of your launch complex. You can just change these out and upgrade them as you see fit. Once again, we're doing the same kind of launch profile. 80 meters per second, we start tipping over to the east, but this time we have boosters. And so at some point we're going to have to drop those boosters. And but by that point we have already reached an altitude that the A4 engine can perform quite phenomenally. But since we did the same launch profile in the previous launch, we're going to go ahead and just time warp forward a little bit, as you can see here, to just about the time before engine cutoff. We go ahead and spin it up manually, and this time we get a much better spin than we did before. And look at that, look how stable that rocket is. If you were wondering what I was meaning by the spin stabilization, just look down at the nav ball and you can see that we're basically pointed prograde. Towards the end we get a little bit of a wobble, but that's okay. We get a clean separation, and we actually have a 1.3 million meter apoapsis. So we are going higher in space than we have ever gone before. We just completed a milestone with that. And sadly we didn't get the speed milestone, but look at this. We are launching ourselves so far that we are now in the nighttime part of Earth. Yeah, so now we got so much mass spectrometer science out of that, plus we completed a milestone and we completed a contract. That was probably the best historic launch of our agency so far. Making it into space was beautiful, it was nice, but that downrange contract is particularly tricky. The 4,500 kilometer is pretty tricky, so being able to complete it so easily was quite nice. So now that was the capstone mission for the suborbital rocketry program, and so now all we have left to do are optional contracts. We actually have successfully completed both programs. So you can see here everything we have is optional. So the program doesn't complete until we actually go into the admin building and mark it off with its little checkpoint. So first we're going to check out this program. As you see, all of those are green, and the green line to the left of my cursor is where we're at now, and the red line is when the contract is actually due. And as you can see, once the contract is due, our funding drops off. But we still have funding for the rest of this year for both of these programs, and we still have the max amount. So there's not necessarily a reason that we need to complete these programs just yet. So before I do anything else, I'm going to go ahead and look and pick out a leader for our chief designer. And we end up going, we're going to look through all of these, but I'm just going to let you know, we go for Werner von Braun for his fast research and the bonus to Hydrolock engine techs, which we'll probably end up using here in the future, especially as we start getting into orbital rocketry. So we're going to go ahead and take him. There's a little bit of a speed for rollouts and construction and all that, but that's worthwhile to take it to have research go quicker and better Hydrolock's engine tech. Alright, so let's just go back to mission control, and we're going to pick up a new contract to do something within this last year. I want to still launch something and complete a contract, even if it's an optional one. And so the optional contract that we end up taking, I'm going to look through here again, just kind of look at all the different things, but the ones that we end up taking is the difficult altitude sounding rocket contract, and that requires us to meet an altitude of 130 kilometers and with 75 units of sounding payload. So this is easily doable by our ARB-6. And we still have the ARB-6 launch complex. We have the ARB-6 all tooled up, so this is going to be a relatively cheap launch to just get a good chunk of reputation. So now we don't need to bring back the sounding payload, so once again we're going to get rid of the parachutes. We're going to put on the service module and fill it with the 75 units that we need. So we're just going to dial it in so that way we get the exact amount that we need. Not too much more over, definitely not less. So there we go. It's a much longer rocket at this point, and we are going to run into editor check failures with that because it is now too tall. But we'll figure that out soon enough. So now we look at the Baby Sergeant 11 times cluster, and we find out that we can actually upgrade it. We can upgrade it to its next component. But let's first check out these casters that we unlocked, and then so we go to put it, but then we realize how big of a SRB it is, and it just doesn't fit the profile of this rocket. It's probably going to be way too heavy for the launch complex. So we decide to just stick with these Baby Sergeants. So yeah, so we're just comparing the two, the Baby Sergeant standard with the upgrade, and we are going to go ahead and take the upgrade to make the Baby Sergeant 11 times cluster a JPL 532A. That is the engine type, and that is going to be what lifts us into space. There we go. So let's go ahead and save this. We're just saving it as the ARB-6. You know, we don't do anything too complicated with it. However, it is now too tall for the SR1 launch complex, so we had to just make a whole new complex entirely because it would have been too much work to renovate the one that we have. So we just decided to make the new one. We're going to dismantle the previous one. We're also going to increase the work productivity of this to make it come out as fast as possible, because we'd like to get this contract completed before the year is up. We want to meet our December 31st, 1956 deadline and have everything done by then. We don't want to dip into the next year for less funds. So we're going to go ahead and hire now. We're going to hire people. We've been firing people all this past couple years, but now we're going to get some new people on that launch complex to make it complete a little bit faster. So now that the complex is made, we're going to go ahead and just put a couple of these rockets into place. We're going to tool this, but it's kind of a useless tool. This rocket is going to kind of signify the end of the sounding rocket era. After this, we're going to be working on larger things. We're going to be using the GW2 as our launch vehicle, so sounding rockets are going to soon be a thing of the past. So tooling that wasn't the smartest idea. I mean, I have two of these rockets in the queue, so at least one of them will be cheaper than it would have been, but there was no real need. So we have now finished the GW2 Aero 6, but that is actually going to take a back seat to the Aero B6 altitude, the difficult altitude sounding rocket that we made. So even though the GW2 is ready, we're just going to go ahead and leave that on its launch pad, just kind of hanging out until we're ready to launch it. So now on the 1st of July 1956, we're ready to launch our 13th launch of our program for a little bit of science and to complete that optional contract, which should give us some good reputation for that. So it's a easy
beautiful launch, no problems, completely nominal. The baby sergeant fires without a problem. Even though we don't have very much data on it, it's fairly reliable, and I appreciate it. After struggling with the Nikes for so long, having something just work on its first try, excellent. So, time warping ahead until the engine cutoff, and this rocket needed to achieve 130 kilometers, and it actually ended up reaching 386 kilometers as its apoapsis. So, more than capable of completing this contract. We could get a contract double the height and still make it. So, very happy with that. Very happy with how efficiently our programs have been coming. And something kind of fun here is, I don't know what happened, but it caught some kind of wind current or something and started going sideways. So that was kind of fun. But we don't need to watch it the whole way down, so we decided to range safety explode it. So, we're saved. Let's go back to the Space Center and get ourselves another contract. First up, let's clear off our launch pad. And before we launch the GW2, let's grab the contract necessary for what we're going to be doing. And that contract is the intermediate downrange distance contract, where we have to reach an apoapsis of we have to go downrange 150 kilometers with 500 units of sounding payload. Now, the 500 units, that is some serious business. We're not going to be able to use an RB-6 to achieve this because that is just too heavy for that rocket. So we're going to need to roll back and edit the GW2 to be able to complete this contract. So we could have saved some time by not rolling it out until we were actually ready for it, but it's okay because it's only a little bit. So we're going to go here for a second and check out the science tab. We have literally no science going at the moment, and so I feel a little stagnant. I feel like there's things that we should be doing that we're not. But I go ahead and take a look at the next set of SRB tech that we have, and I feel like this is going to be very useful coming up here pretty soon. I'm going to try to attempt our orbital contracts. I'm going to try to utilize SRBs a little more than I had in the previous playthroughs, and hopefully I'll have better luck with getting to orbit and stuff. But that will be in the following episodes. I already have the next episode already edited. It is not part of this kind of, beginning programs and everything. It's a few optional contracts to get ourselves some more science. But that will come later. So as you see here, I didn't like having the sounding payload on the RB-6, so I went ahead and moved it down to the GW2. And we're going to make it this nice wide but short tank, so it doesn't mess with our launch complex editor checks for our height, because 500 units of sounding payload is quite a bit. So I'm going to first go ahead and test this, because I wasn't sure whether or not having the sounding payload on the lower stage would count. But in my tests, what I realized is I don't need this RB-6 for this contract. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. And also, this is quite the good lifting vehicle. I'm very happy with how this came out. I don't want to do too many changes with it just yet, so I'm going to go ahead and save that as a sub-assembly. I'm going to name it the GW2. It's still going to have the tag Aero 6 on it, because I forgot to change that before setting the sub-assembly, but that's not a real big problem. Real fast before I put it on the queue, I want to add some science experiments to it, because we never had science experiments on this avionics. We only had it on the RB-6, so we might as well still do some science, even though
This is just mainly meant to complete the contract. And so now it is ready to be saved, and those edits will be next in the queue. But before that, we have the completion of our last RP-6. And so we're going to go ahead and grab a contract for it to complete. And that contract is going to be the altitude sounding rocket difficult. This one has a little bit higher of an altitude required. But sadly, we decided to cancel the downrange contract in order to take the altitude sounding contract. We could have just launched the altitude rocket secondary, but I really wanted to get this contract done while we still wait for the GW2 to be completed. Wasn't the best. I think I did lose a little bit of reputation by canceling that contract. However, I'm hoping that the added reputation from taking both these optional contracts will make up for it. So we're going to roll out our rocket to the launch pad. We're going to warp to completion. But before we go and launch this rocket, I want to make some changes to how our launch complexes are being handled. Our GW2 is not set to launch until January of the following year, and I don't like that. I want to complete its launch within the contract deadlines. And so we're going to go ahead and set this to rush, set this launch complex to rush, and that is going to bring us down to December 12th, 1956 is when it should be ready. And that's much more pleasing. I'd rather a December launch than a January launch. Let's go ahead and save this. I haven't really been talking about it, but saving is very important in RP-1. But anyways, for our 14th launch, we are ready to launch the RP-6 on the 18th of September 1956 for altitude sounding rocket difficult contract. So now, the difference between this sounding rocket and the previous one is during the test flights of this, for some reason, I kept getting ullage issues in the Aerobee engine, and so for this particular launch, I decided to put the Aerobee engine on the same stage as the baby sergeants, so they will fire together. As you can see here, I'm noting the fact that we have plenty of data on it, but for some reason, it just wanted to work this way this time, even though it worked perfectly normal the last time. So we're going to start by firing the Aerobee, let that spool up. Now we're firing the baby sergeants. So now both engines are firing at the same time. It's a little inefficient because the Aerobee could be saving that fuel right now instead of burning it, but this was the way that we were able to complete a successful launch, so therefore this is how we are completing the last sounding rocket of the era. And perfectly nominal separation. So this is looking to be like it will be a successful flight. So as we pass through the cloud layer, we are just going to skip ahead to when the engine cuts off, and we'll see how it completes the contract. So there's main engine cutoff. And as you can see, our apoapsis is more than doable. So we just need to follow it up, watch to see that it's doing science. We're going to separate just to save ourselves a little weight. And then there you go. Our contract is completed. And once again, we don't need to follow it all the way down, so we'll just range safety it after it passes the 40-kilometer mark where it's no longer producing science. So there we go. We've got our optional sounding rocket complete. So let's go ahead and pick up that contract that we canceled before, the downrange difficult. We're actually going to choose the difficult this time instead of the intermediate, and that requires the same 500 units of sounding payload, so our rocket's going to be fine. But now we have to make it 240 kilometers downrange, and given the test that we ran previously, that the GW2 can easily make the 150 kilometer downrange, so the 240 kilometers seems like a doable amount. So we're going to go ahead and take the more difficult contract, which will give us more reputation upon completion. So it's worthwhile. And the GW2 is going to be our last launch of the era, our last launch of the program, and our last launch of this episode. This very long episode. For everyone who's stuck around, thank you so much. I hope you've been enjoying this. Let me know your thoughts, because this was a lot of work, but I'm very happy with how it came out, and I'm very happy to bring it to y'all. But on the 23rd of December, 1956, our 15th launch of our program, the GW2 ignites and fires and lifts off. And as you can see, we took a different path in this RP-1 playthrough than we had in the previous two that we had on this channel. And that's why I wanted to bring this to you to show you how we changed and how we did things differently in this playthrough. So when our next episode continues, and there will be another episode of this, I'm not going to just end it at the ends of the program. We're going to move on to some orbital contracts, but once I started the next part of the program and I'm using SRBs and I have a different launch vehicle and all this stuff, I felt like it was too far separated from the previous episode that it wouldn't make sense continuity-wise. And I also had been going pretty quickly through the build process in the previous episodes. I had kind of just assumed people knew what it was I was talking about and what the different aspects of RP-1 were, that I was just like going right on through it. So I decided slowing things down and talking things out in this would make for a better video for that. Sorry about the camera wobble right there. I accidentally pressed the letter V. So here we are, doing the same launch profile as the GW2 Aero 6, however without the Aero 6 this time. So there's no separation, no nothing. All we got to do is reach our target apoapsis, and then once we hit that, we're going to point towards the horizon and just work on getting ourselves some distance. This is the best way to complete the downrange contract, by the way, is to give yourself the regular launch profile, get yourself to 45 degrees, and then once you hit the apoapsis that you need, just point yourself towards the horizon, slightly above the horizon. You don't want to be pointing down, and that will give you the downrange distance necessary, because you don't need to go high. Once you hit the apoapsis required by the contract, then that's all you need. So let's go ahead and time warp this forward. We're getting some decent science out of it. And we have completed our contract. As you see in the top right, the green on our contract reader lets us know that this was successful. And once again, I don't need to recover anything out of this rocket, so we're just going to go ahead and let it fight against the atmospheric forces and explode when it's ready. And with that beautiful explosion comes the end of this program. So let's head back to the Space Center and just kind of see where we're at from there. So we're going to clean up this debris on the launch pad. And we're going to
recondition the launch pad. We don't necessarily need to do this now. We could save this for the next episode, but I always like to recondition the launch pad as soon as we get out and just get that taken care of so we don't have to worry about anything. So let's go ahead and check out our progress at the admin building. And like we saw before, both programs have been completed, but now we are at the deadline mark. We are the end of December, and we made it. By December 31st, 1956, we had to have both these programs done. And on the 23rd or the 24th of December, 1956, the KSC had completed both programs at a fast pace. They readied themselves for a new era in science, a new era in rocketry, and a new era in the history of spaceflight. But that will come in the next episode. So thank you everyone for watching this feature-length film practically. I hope you learned something from this about RP-1. I hope this helps you in your career playthroughs. If it does, please consider giving me a like, drop me a comment, let me know your thoughts, and I will see y'all in the next one. Take care.